And today we are talking to New York City mayoral candidate Andrew Yang. Mr. Yang, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time.
Of course, Linda. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with the polls. You are currently leading. You're the lead candidate in the New York City mayoral polls. I wanted to ask why you think that is.
No, Linda, I think that people can sense that I'm not of the government bureaucracies that have been letting us down for quite some time, and I'm here to help. I think I can speed up our recovery, and as someone who's run a small business right here in New York City, I know it's going to be the restaurants, the bars, the storefronts that are suffering right now that are going to help get us back on our feet. So I'm thrilled with the polls, but we're taking nothing for granted. We just have to keep out working and letting people know what we can do to help get New York City going again.
You broke through in the presidential race with big picture ideas like universal basic income, which have appealed to a lot of people around the country and a lot of people here in New York City, it turns out. The next mayor is going to have to lead the city out of this pandemic economy, the devastation that we've been facing lately. So I wanted to ask you first about universal basic income. Your campaign says you'd introduce it as mayor right here in New York City. 500,000 New Yorkers, of the most needy New Yorkers, would benefit from that. Tell us, who exactly would receive that and how would it work?
Thanks, Linda. When I was running for president, people were like, universal what? But now 55% of Americans are for it. And this is not my idea. This is an idea championed by Martin Luther King, whose son I'm so proud to say is co-chairing my campaign. So our goal is going to be to alleviate extreme poverty here in New York City by getting some buying power into the hands of the 500,000 or so poorest New Yorkers who are really on the edge of losing their homes, of winding up on the streets. And the way New York City works, Linda, is that if someone winds up on our streets, then it's an extraordinarily costly thing to try and address, both on a human and an economic level. So by putting resources into people's hands to keep them in more stable and safer situations, it'll actually pay for itself in large measure.
So with the economy in the city the way it is because of the pandemic, do you think that if you are elected mayor, this is an idea that you could get through, that could actually happen?
Well, I do, thanks to our incredible Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. we have a $6.1 billion in aid coming to the city, another $8.3 billion for the New York metro area. I am so pumped to have Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer actually getting help into the hands of the American people. And it was one reason why I spent time in Georgia trying to help win those Senate seats, because it turns out we needed every single vote. But we're going to have 1 to 2 years, Linda, of some operating flexibility, and we need to use that time as effectively as we can.
So still on the topic of the economy, you have said that the city is going to be dealing with this for a few years at least going forward. And there are many New Yorkers right now who are still dealing with food insecurity, housing insecurity. If you are elected mayor, what are the first priorities in order to get jobs, quality jobs, and the economy just rolling in New York City, rolling again?
So here are the two big ones that everyone can understand and see and feel, Linda. We're down 60 million tourists, and those 60 million tourists supported 300,000 jobs. About half of the jobs we're missing. So the first order of business is to let everyone know that New York City is open, that we're welcoming tourists back. Broadway, I'm happy to say, is going to be reopened a bit later this year. And the goal is to try and get us from right now, it's like 0 to 5 million. We have to try and get that to 25, 30 million. If we do that, then we're going to create tens of thousands of jobs very quickly. The second thing that everyone also can see around us, we're missing 82% of commuters. And when someone doesn't come into the office, that's not just that company, that's the security guards, the cleaning staff, the food truck operators, the retail storefronts that ordinarily serve those commuters. We need to let companies have the confidence to say to their workers, you need to come back to the office because that's vital for New York City's recovery. And I'm happy to say I'm talking to CEOs who are desperate to get people back as soon as the vaccine is distributed broadly enough.
But that's going to take a level of confidence, of everyone having the confidence to come back into the city. How do you build that?
Oh, what we have to do, Linda, is let people know that everyone around them has also been vaccinated. And there are two straightforward possibilities. Number one is to have an app on your smartphone that it's a vaccine passport. It just says essentially green. And so you just flash it when you go into the office building or the restaurant or the theater. And then you can sit there and relax and know that everyone else has also been vaccinated. Israel, which is ahead of us on this curve, has actually started distributing bracelets to people where you just have the bracelet and you show the bracelet. It's like New York City is like the biggest VIP section of a club in history where you like get the bracelet so you can like walk on in. But that's the kind of measure that we need to adopt and champion for people to feel confident that they're perfectly safe because everyone around them has already been vaccinated.
We must be the same generation. That's a very our generation reference.
Don't tell me that. Don't tell me that people wouldn't understand that reference.
You know, when you think of the city's economy, even before the pandemic, the economy was not working for a lot of New Yorkers. We did a report recently at 880 that really struck me that said our essential workers in New York City essentially can't afford the apartments here. Street Easy had an economist do an analysis that said the average essential worker makes $56,000 a year. That means they cannot afford 96% of the listings that are even on the website Street Easy. So there's an affordable housing crisis in New York City. How does the next mayor deal with that, make the city livable for New Yorkers?
There's one big thing we can do, and it's already happening, and we need to invest in it and speed it up. So one byproduct of the lack of tourists and commuters is that you have 80% of hotel rooms unoccupied right now. And some of these hotel operators are turning in their keys. They're saying, look, like, I can't afford to even try and stay open. So the city needs to claim some of these hotels and then convert them into affordable housing and supportive housing units for New Yorkers who need them right now. And this is happening. I'm happy to say you can actually get housing onto the sort of the affordable market at half the cost of new construction. So we need to marry the opportunity to the need. I would also relax restrictions on things like accessory dwelling units, which tend to be basements, micro-living, co-living. There are things we can do to try and increase the supply, but we need to take advantage of the idle capacity in hotels and also in some cases, some unused commercial office spaces that can be converted.
I wanted to ask you too about some of our communities of color and policing in the city. You have candidates in this race who have some experience with the NYPD, with city government, and after the racial justice protests and the racial reckoning that we had this year in New York and around the country, I wanted to ask why you think you're the best candidate to deal with the issues of policing and the communities of color in the city.
There are real cultural problems with the NYPD. And as a numbers guy, like I looked at the amount of money we're spending to settle lawsuits against abusive cops every year, and it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So that gives you a sense of the scope of the problem. I've championed one way that I think will help improve the culture of the NYPD, which is to have new officers live in New York City. This is something we already require of employees at other agencies that are frankly not as important. And if you had officers who are living in the city, then they would have a better understanding of the communities they're serving and protecting. And they would also be commuting within the city and be walking around off duty. Because when you talk to New Yorkers, we're very concerned about the civil rights abuses in the NYPD. But we're also concerned about the fact that violent crimes are rising in various communities. And so this could be a way we can address both concerns at the same time.
We've seen a surge in anti-Asian violence in the city here and around the country. As mayor, how could you combat that?
Well, it's devastating personally, Lynda. I just met with a worker who was punched in the face for no reason other than being Asian. And I will say, as an Asian American, I can feel the difference on the streets. So I have a few things I would do immediately as mayor. Number one, we need to fund the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force at the NYPD, which right now is a volunteer effort. I don't think this is a problem that you assign volunteers to. Number two, we should be categorizing and classifying these incidents as hate crimes because in many cases, the person was clearly motivated by the victim's race. And number three is we need to establish more bonds of trust and communication with Asian American communities, because right now, even though we can see the spike in incidents, I can guarantee you a lot of them are not being reported because many Asian Americans do not feel comfortable reaching out to law enforcement right now or city agencies. And I think I can help with that.
I wanted to ask too, in these pandemic times, campaigning for mayor must be a much more challenging thing. When you think of campaigns, think of people out in the communities and getting out the streets. I know you are out talking to people in neighborhoods and communities. How are you doing that effectively? And what are you hearing from people when you're meeting them in the city?
Lynda, it's been interesting because people seem both happy to see me, which is very exciting, but also somewhat surprised. I'm like a pleasant surprise in like the subway. I learned so much every day talking to people. I talked to one gentleman on the subway a few days ago who is living in a shelter. He came out of prison after 30 years. And I have to say, Lynda, he had this calmness and serenity about him where like you just felt like he was really at peace in a particular way. He had 2 degrees that I think he got while he was in prison, but he was very very calm about saying he's like, I don't think anyone's going to hire me. And like having this conversation with him made me think about. He also said that the shelters were not a pleasant place. So this conversation made me think about how to reintegrate folks who are coming out of prison at a higher level, because I guarantee you that this gentleman could contribute a lot in a lot of different environments. When I told my wife, Evelyn, about this conversation after I got home, she said we should put him in touch with various youth because there are a lot of kids, I think, that would have benefited from just being around this gentleman. So that's the kind of exchange that you can't plan, but it happens every day in New York City. It's one reason I love the city so much.
And tell me about a hopeful exchange that you've had with someone, or something that was just a pleasant or fun exchange for you.
Well, gosh, Lynda, like that happens to me all the time because it's always like, Yang, where's my $1,000? I get a selfie. So like, I mean, that's very uplifting, and I get that all of the time. The energy source I have really is when people in New York saying, like, I'm so glad you're running, like, I want to help. I mean, it's incredibly motivating to think that you might be able to help improve the way of life for your home, the greatest city in the world, a home of 8.3 million people. And I get that message every day on the streets.
You started a nonprofit called Venture for America for college graduates to match them to startups. I wanted to know what from your nonprofit work that you have learned that you want to bring into city government, especially as it could help communities of color.
I learned so much, and the organization helped small businesses in Detroit, Baltimore, Cleveland, New Orleans grow, and a lot of those cities are majority people of color. I'm so pro entrepreneurship. We are founding a People's Bank of New York that's going to channel $100 million plus to community development financial institutions that serve primarily minority communities, because I know there's so many aspiring entrepreneurs who right now are not given a fair shot, who can't get the first seed capital to get started. I want to change that. I want to change that in the biggest way I can, because I think that entrepreneurship, it's not just about businesses and money. It's about providing something that the community needs. It's about doing something that gives you a source of pride and energy, and there's so much heart and soul in so many small businesses, and we need to give more people a chance to build them. So I'm super passionate about this, Lynda, and I hope to apply it right here in New York City as soon as I'm mayor.
That's great. Switching gears now, I wanted to ask you about something that's been dominating the news, and that's the dual scandals that are happening with Governor Cuomo, both his nursing home issue and the sexual harassment scandals that he's facing. I know that you sent a letter to Governor Cuomo asking him to step aside while the investigations into these issues take place. I wanted to ask you, given what we've learned over the past couple of days, that there is a 6th accuser, that there have been accusations that have gone to the police, do you think that's still the best way forward?
We need someone who can do the work of the state. And right now that does not seem to be Governor Cuomo. So as you said, I sent a letter asking him to step aside and have the lieutenant governor assume that role, pending the conclusion of the investigation. I think that's the right move. I think that would make everyone feel satisfied that there is someone who's able to lead the state, frankly, not distracted by a continuous drumbeat of accusations and, frankly, scandals at this point.
Yeah. How badly do you think it can affect city politics and local issues with a wounded governor?
Well, one of the things I'm keeping in mind very, very much, Lynda, is that the job of the mayor is to deliver for the people of New York City. And in order to deliver for the people of New York City, you need to have a good working relationship with the governor and the legislators in Albany. If you don't have that, then you can't deliver at high a level. Now, I talked to a state legislator last night, and he said that obviously everything is focused right now on these proceedings against the governor, and a lot of other business. Ordinarily right now, they'd be focused on the budget, which is enormously important, but that's not happening right now. So the interests of the city and the state are aligned in the sense that the city is the economic engine of the state, but we need state legislators to be doing their jobs in order for us to be able to do our jobs. So it's one reason why I think Governor Cuomo stepping aside is the right thing, because we need them focused on the business of the state, and that affects the city every single day.
Well, they called my last question, so I want to thank you so much for giving us the time, and it was really a pleasure to talk to you.
Lynda, this was so much fun. I will come back anytime.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that at least you are on the same page with my bracelet.
I'm down with that reference. I'm okay with it. Please call into the station anytime. We would love to have you and love to discuss any issues with you.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.